Hello, history scholars. Mrs. Olson here. Today's video lesson is titled Encounters in East Asia. So let's begin with our learning target, which reads, explain how European contact impacted East Asia. So we've been learning about European explorers going out around the world, and now we're getting into the time period where they're trying to stake their claim in these other areas of the world and actually control them. So specifically, today's lesson is about how that impacted East Asia. Now, as always with our video lessons, make sure that you have pen and paper handy so that you can record important information. And when it calls for interaction, make sure that you are sharing your answers out loud, helping you to remember the information and be interactive with the material. Okay, here goes. So, this first slide, move me, is titled European Contact with Ming China. So let's talk about how the Chinese ruled their country, and that is they had royalty. So their royalty were actually called dynasties, and the family, the dynasty who ruled China for many years were the Ming. So Ming China refers to the ruling family, the ruling dynasty of China at this point in time. Okay, so let me back up just one second. So here we have the Portuguese who are wanting to open up trade with China. Chinese don't really care a whole lot about obtaining Portuguese products because they think that they're inferior. However, the Portuguese, they want Chinese silks and porcelain because they are beautiful. Now, instead of the Chinese maybe getting metalwork or other textiles from the Portuguese, they don't believe that they are up to par. They're not the same quality as Chinese, so they're actually demanding payment in gold and silver. So they want money, they don't necessarily want to trade with products. Okay. So the Ming Dynasty, they're not allowing the Portuguese into China. They're setting up a trading post at an island called Macau. And Macau happens to be close to Canton, China. Okay? And this says that foreigners could only trade under the supervision of imperial officials. So they're not allowing Chinese merchants and Portuguese merchants to just trade with each other. They have to do it under the guise, under the supervision of the imperial Ming Chinese officials. Okay, and moving me again. At the end of each trading season, so the Portuguese, they weren't allowed to be there all year long to trade whenever and with whomever they wanted in China. There was a specific trading season, and when this trading season ended, the imperial officials of the Ming Dynasty made them leave. All right, so you should have been recording notes. If you need to pause here to record what's on this screen, do so. I'm going to go to the next slide. Okay, so here are a few pictures of Chinese silks and porcelain. So obviously this is a modern picture to show you the beautiful Chinese silk. And here's another one. And then this would be considered a period picture because we have a Chinese tunic that was made during the Ming Dynasty, and you can see what it looked like then. It's been preserved all these centuries. Okay, and then this gives you an example of what the Europeans were doing with those Chinese silks. The aristocracy and the royal families of Europe were using them to make these beautiful, beautiful gowns. Okay. All right, this one is titled Seeking Converts. So we are talking about missionaries and Christianity. Okay, well, so the Portuguese were Catholic. Trying to go back here, sorry guys. Okay, the Portuguese were Catholic, and with many religions, they are trying to make sure that their religion is followed by many around the globe. And so these Portuguese missionaries were sent with the merchants to China. Now this note is telling you that they really didn't have a lot of success in making converts in China. They were Buddhist in China, and they're not too interested in converting to Catholicism. So, one group within the Catholic Church, they're called Jesuits. In fact, there are a couple of Jesuit universities in the United States. The Jesuits were the group of Catholics that are coming from Spain, Italy, and Portugal to try to convert the Chinese to Catholicism. Now, what the Chinese did do as far as religion and European religion, Catholicism goes, is that they were wanting to learn about Europe from the Jesuits. So back in this time period, what you have are an educated population really only in your church officials and within the aristocracy and the royal families. Kind of the lower classes, the middle classes, even the merchants. They're not really educated. Okay, so this gives us an example of the Jesuits and the Chinese working together, and this is Matteo Ricci. So he's an Italian Jesuit priest, and this is a mathematician from China. I'll probably butcher his name, but Zhu Guanqi, maybe. And what they do is work together to translate Euclid's elements into Chinese so that the Chinese can have this scientific document, this book. All right, so what I want to do is to learn a little bit about the Qing Dynasty. So from the Ming Dynasty, power transfers to the Qing Dynasty, and here we go. Now, I'll back up a little bit. You don't really have to write this down. The Qing Dynasty were actually Manchu invaders. So they came from Manchuria, they broke through the Great Wall of China, and then they were able to establish power in China right about this time. So a little bit about these guys is that they adopt the Confucian style of government. And so if you took 6th grade history with me, that would have been a while ago, but you would know that Confucius was a philosopher who helped to establish many different principles within Chinese culture. And these Manchu invaders decided to keep the Confucian system of government, which won them support from many scholar officials, which used to be in power in China. Okay, and so here's one thing that kind of makes it fair to win over these scholar officials that used to be in charge of the government, and that is that for every Manchu person, they had a Chinese person. Okay, now this is one of the Qing emperors, and what he does, what he's known for, is extending Chinese power into Central Asia. So he's one of these emperors who keeps pushing the boundaries, the borders of China to exert their influence. And this guy, Qianlong, is King Qi's grandson, and what he does is to expand China's border to rule the largest area in the nation's history. Okay, so here we go, showing you a map showing how these borders ended up within the Qing Empire. And I know you can't see it, but this starts in 1644, and then they actually are in power until 1911, so quite a long time. All right, so within the Qing period is peace and prosperity, so we're going to learn why. So within this period, the Chinese economy expanded. Remember, we started talking about the trading post that was set up at Macau, and the Portuguese and the Chinese trading. So the Chinese economy expands. That means that people are selling their goods and they are making money. And typically, when people are making money, they're relatively happy peoples. Okay, now one of the things that was happening around the world with these explorers is that there were goods going all over the world. So we have learned that there were explorers that went to the Americas, right? And so from the Americas, potatoes and corn were brought back to China, and they actually start to plant them, grow them, and trade them. Okay? Now, because of the potatoes and corn being grown in China, in part, they double their population. So look at this number, from 140 million to 300 million. Okay, and then we've been talking about silk and porcelain, but they also begin to grow cotton, and it becomes part of their economy in which they are making money. So this says that international trade grew. This is all of what we've been talking about because people are wanting Chinese goods. So remember that typically when a country, a group of people are making money, they are generally happy. They're able to put food on their families' tables. They're not really having to go to war. They don't have a reason to because they're happy and they're making money. Okay. So here's a picture of Chinese porcelain. This one, This one is Chinese porcelain that has been turned into European tea service. And here are a few more Chinese silks and traditional Chinese robes, and then European dress. Okay. So, what we begin to see is that the Qing Dynasty is rejecting contact with Europeans. So, the Europeans begin to exert this pressure upon the Chinese to expand trade to other cities. Remember, they were only trading at Macau. They were only allowed to trade there. And the Europeans want to get further into China, and China says, I don't want to do that. Go back one. Okay, so to give you context of the centuries in which we are going through, in 1793 there were some merchants. You saw the Lord Macartney. I'll talk about him in a second. But there were samples of British-made goods that were mistaken for gifts and not products. So what happens is this Lord Macartney brings with him these goods that he wants to trade. So he wants the Chinese to buy them. He wants to get money from them. Now, the emperor thinks that these are gifts. He doesn't really think much about them, and he thinks that they're inferior to Chinese products. So, this says that Lord Macartney, he's part of this expedition. He's the leader of this expedition in 1793. He would not kowtow. So I'm going to show you a picture. Kowtowing is when you bow to the emperor, and the British did not believe that they were that they needed to do that because they were superior to the Chinese. So it says that he wouldn't kowtow to the emperor, and he offended the emperor by saying that the English were superior. All right, so here is a picture of that, and he should actually be putting his forehead on the ground to show respect to the emperor. And this is what he wouldn't do. So this was offensive to the Chinese emperor. Okay, so this is what kowtowing is. If you respect the emperor, you are putting your forehead on the ground and you are kneeling in that manner, and the British would not do this. All right, so we're going to kind of switch countries here because we're talking about East Asia, and we are going to talk about Korea now. So Korea chooses isolation. What does it mean to be isolated? If you're isolated, you're by yourself, right? So Korea doesn't want to have anything to do with the outside world. So in 1592 and in 97, Japan invades Korea. You're right, this is not a European country. but we're talking about context here. So Japan, which is another country in East Asia, they invade Korea. Okay, and in 1636, the Manchus invade Korea. So you can see why Korea is going to choose isolation here. They've been invaded too many times. So this one reads that Korean rulers adopt a policy of isolation. They don't want to have anything to do with the outside world. They just want to be by themselves. This last note here says during the 250-year period of isolation, Koreans sent tribute missions and brought back maps and books on scientific discoveries. So they still want to know what's going on in the world. They just don't want other people coming into their country. Okay, so here we have, I'm going to expand this just a little bit. Okay, so here we have Korea. Okay, Korea is on a peninsula. You can see in this corner is Japan, and the blue arrows indicate the Japanese attacks in 1592 and 1597. Okay. All right, so foreign traders in Japan. So the Japanese welcomed Westerners at first. Now we're switching gears, right? We talked about the Japanese invading Korea and then Korea choosing isolationism, and now we're talking about Japan. So Japan at first was open to talking to and trading with the Westerners. They traded guns and in-brought Christianity. They learned about the Western printing press, okay? But when Spain seizes the Philippines, Japanese shoguns, these are the people that are in charge of Japan, they're kind of like military leaders, they saw these Westerners as a threat. So in 1638, European merchants were banned from going to China, and then Japanese people are not allowed to leave China. So this marks this period of isolation for more than 200 years, all right? So in the late 1800s is when we are going to see kind of a turn of events when Japan is forced to open themselves back up. Okay, but during this period of isolation, Japanese art and literature, it flourishes. Okay, so here is a picture of art that flourished during this 200-year period of isolationism. And here are a few more. And that comes to the end of Encounters in East Asia. I hope you guys took good notes. You can use them on the assignment. Please let me know if you have questions. Bye!